Now, the closing session for day one on digitalization in the new normal. And this is a dialogue. The moderator for this dialogue is Sajjeed Aslam. He is the country head Pakistan for ACCA. Sajjeed, please join us on this stage. Our panelists are Aamir Ibrahim, the CEO of Jazz and the chairman of Mobilink Microfinance Bank Limited. He's especially here from Islamabad. I'm grateful to him. And our another dear friend from Islamabad, he's especially here for this session, Irfan Wahab Khan, the CEO of Telenor and also the chairman of Telenor Bank, the two mainstream telecom operators in Pakistan, powered by UFOON and PTCL. So our third panelist is Dr. Ayesha Khan. She is the country head Acumen for Pakistan and also the board member of Bank Alfalah Limited. Another dear friend from Islamabad, Dr. Shahid Mahmud, is the chairman of Interactive Group and board trustee, global trustee of Eisenhower Fellowships. Another Islamabad friend is here, Barkan Saeed. He's the chairman of PASHA, Pakistan Software Houses Association. So 4 members from Islamabad, and I'm grateful to all of you for your presence here. In addition to Tabish, he's also here, especially for this session from Islamabad, despite the COVID situation and all. I'm grateful to all of you, and Sajjeed, over to you for the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Asfar. I think, and I'll invite you to think as well, we are going through that time, even pre-COVID, the digitization was something which is very, very inevitable. Post-COVID, we are talking about that could be one of a mean which can expedite the recovery. So what we have to think ahead, how the life will look like, how the history will really narrate our role in that recovery, which we are going to, which we are trying to do, a recovery which is going to be at the same level where we were before, or are we going to talk about a step change? So now we invite everybody to literally think ahead and act now and think about that step change, which as an individual, as an institution, as a society, or as a business, we can really contribute and we can play our role. So when the historian will be writing it, 50 years and 100 years from now, somebody will be reading and they can figure out there were people who can think, who could think ahead, and they can act as well, and they can make those changes. So to explore that perspective, that what the future will look like, what that pathway to recovery, and I love that Martin Dow, hope and care will shape the future. So what is going to shape the recovery and what the future look like? I'll invite first Dr. Shahid Mahmud to really draw and help us to imagine how the life of individual will look like in a very digitized, connected world. And then we can build upon that. What does it mean? How does we take it forward? And we will ask other panelists to ask, really bring their perspective. So Dr. Shahid, sir.
Thank you. It is indeed a challenge to be put in this spot, but loving technology and being in this very amazing panel, it reminded me when I was a kid, and these were the days where you had no technology and you had to write letters. And I used to be in a boarding school, so the second prep where you had to compulsorily study was a very boring time for a guy like me. So I would write letters to Sri Lanka to have pen pals. And the younger generation today wouldn't understand what pen pals are. And in one of the letters, I found a friend telling me out of Sri Lanka that Arthur C. Clarke lived in Colombo. And I was so fascinated that from the age of 14, I consistently wrote letters to Arthur C. Clarke, and eventually I was given the opportunity to meet him for half an hour in Colombo. And this is a man who in 1964 had said everything about technology that we are encompassing today. And he spoke about cellular phones, he was the guy who gave the geosatellite positioning. And inspired by him, I ended up working with AsiaSat and Cable and Wireless. And when mobiles came, it was 19th of October, 1989, when I signed the first license for a duopoly as a shareholder and director of Parktel to bring mobile phones to this country. If somebody asked me in 1989 how the mobile phones would look, I can assure you, Irfan and Aamir would be totally like, what were you saying? We didn't anticipate more than 500,000 phones in this country. And we lost a lot of inventory because the phones were changing at that pace. Technology today has to be looked with two perspectives. One, if you see the connectivity that is going to the US, it is at about 1,600 terabytes, or 16 terabytes. And if you look at it in our part, it's 1. And if you look at the population change that will happen in the next 80 years, because that is how we have to set the perspective on what the future would look like. So one is the technology, and one is the population shift. The population shift by 2100 would be 40% of the world will be Africa, and 42% of the world will be Asia. And that will bring a cultural shift. Now do that cultural shift and connect people to that. And one great thing that the two friends of mine from the industry have established, and obviously Barkan here and Ayesha doing Acumen, is that we are the 8th smartphone superpower of the world already. We are also the 5th population-wise. But here is the funny number. We are 287 people per square kilometer, whereas a country like China is only 153. So we add 4.3 million people every year to this country. With urbanization at 60%, we need to start looking at building new 4.3 cities. Now, what would the people look like? Technology is doubling every 12 months to 18 months. So the 3G, 4G, just to give you a comparison, 3G, if it was 3, 5G will be 100. And by 2030, when we will have 6G, will be 1,000 times the speed. We are adding 1 billion people to this earth every 10 to 12 years. With that level of connectivity, we are going to be doing systems within systems. So there will be an intertwining of technologies, not only artificial or nano or other technologies that you listen to every day, but there will be new levels of, even advanced levels of quantum computing, which will be neural-based computing, neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic computing will allow you to connect different systems. If you take a human today, we are already connected to 7 devices already in 2020, 7 devices per individual as per the statistics of the world today. And if we are doubling this every 12 to 18 months, that is where we will go. Now, here is the future for Pakistan, which I feel when we talk about the Future Summit, it should be, COVID, I think, has given us the insight to accelerate this development. And this acceleration comes from the fact that if people like we just heard from the power sector, if we can get our power right, it is 36% of our computing. If we get our bandwidth right, we have 1,000 kilometers of sea where we can get submarine cables. And instead of calling CPEC the route for industrialization, I think CPEC will be the route of connecting the rest of the world in Asia, which is Central Asia and China via our sea routes. And that is where the future lies. People will be super connected, and there will be a digital of every one of us. And once we realize that digital amongst us, we also have to realize that we have to train our future generation. Our future generation is our biggest asset, where 66 million are under 15 and 130 million are under the age of 30. If we use these people correctly, with the help of my friends here, I can assure you, Pakistan can accelerate as the 5th largest economy of the world, and I say this with complete confidence, because we have tremendous amount of growth opportunity. If we look at our GDP today at 354 billion, our neighbor is doing 2.5 trillion, China is doing 13 trillion. The growth is just unbelievable, and the road to that growth that is connecting Africa with Asia goes via Pakistan. And that is the digital road that we're talking about.
Thank you, Shahid Sahab. And you have put a lot of pressure on Aamir and Irfan right now. So coming to Aamir first towards you. While we are talking about that digital twins and we are talking about that connected world, and we are not talking about Pakistan alone, we are talking about connectivity where the entire world is working in a different way. So what does it mean for the businesses in Pakistan, as well as what does it mean for you as a telecom company working on a financial inclusion as well? So how you see those things playing out in the future, particularly in a Pakistan context, Aamir?
Okay, it's switched on, I think, now. Well, the future is bright by many different definitions, but that was a view of the world from 30,000 feet. I'd like to bring it a little bit more granular, which makes us look at it from a more realistic and perhaps less optimistic perspective, but realistic nonetheless. When we think about the future, we don't really have to think about it. We can just look at what's happening in the rest of the world. And fortunately, because of internet and us traveling from many different parts of the world, you can actually go and see what is already happening. So future is already happening right now. Unfortunately, it's just not happening in Pakistan. So the question is, how can we get up to speed to where we should be? You talked about how do I see businesses, and telecom infrastructure is now a really important foundation layer for every single business. So you would have a suffix of tech in everything or any business that you've known. Finance became fintech, education is edtech, advertising is adtech, agriculture, agri-tech, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that we are living in isolation. Every company, every industry has to actually think about how do they adopt technology. Our responsibility as traditional companies, and we're not traditional anymore, we are trying to pivot also. So one of the responsibilities that I have as an infrastructure provider is to lay the foundation of broadband. That in Pakistani context happens primarily through mobile phones and through the mobile network as opposed to broadband, which is through fiber. So one thing is very sure that we've got two responsibilities, the infrastructure layer, and then the more exciting layer is what happens on internet, right? And that's where some of the discussion will happen later in this panel. But the basic foundation that we have today in Pakistan is not very robust. It's not future-proof. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I was just listening to Tabish and all the challenges. We're still discussing in Pakistan how we can provide effective electricity to 220 million people, right? We today provide as an industry telecom services to close to about 170 million people, right? So we've already done a lot of things. We've gone to those areas where there's no electricity. But when I look at where we are compared to where we should be, we're far behind. And there's a lot of work, and I know that later on we will talk about the recommendations and what we need to do. But I don't want to start off on an extremely pessimistic thing. That was, I think, overtly optimistic in terms of where we will be in 30 years' time, or like the fifth largest economy. I hope that we will, and I think we've got the raw materials to be. But judging by our current run rate and judging by what we have been able to accomplish in the recent past, I think we have to significantly up our game in providing a much more robust digital infrastructure compared to what exists today. And as the government has a lot of focus on some of the other things when it comes to food shortages and providing robust electricity, one of the things that should be really high for the Prime Minister and his cabinet and the agenda for the country is how do we secure our digital future? And that comes on the backbone of a robust broadband network.
And I'm just building on that. How you see the customer expectation? There's one thing we are talking about, there's infrastructure, but there's a certain consumption like the layer and the services and the content consumption even you were talking about. So how do you see that changing in, let's say, the next couple of years if we see immediate future? What does it mean for the consumer, for the customer expectation perspective?
Exponential. So unfortunately, we have, I shouldn't say unfortunately, the customer needs are evolving at a much faster pace than what we can deliver. So our average customer gives us about less than 250 rupees a month. They expect 5 signals or 4 signals, depending upon what handset you have, anywhere in Pakistan, and about at least 10 megabits per second of internet speed. And you have one dropped call, you get lambasted on Twitter and everything else. So the customer expectations are definitely moving much faster than what I can deliver and perhaps what Irfan can deliver. But we like these customers, right? They challenge us. They get us to work faster, harder, and become more obsessed with what we have to do to make sure that we justify being in the positions that we're in. But the basic need is, and I think somebody talked about this thing a couple of sessions earlier, that data is the new oil. I say that internet is the new electricity. And they want this electricity to be ubiquitous, available everywhere at a fast speed, and almost entirely free. So that's how the expectations are changing.
Now, thank you, Aamir. And while we are talking about the connectivity, customer expectation, quantum computing, such a connected world, and at the same time, and that's not new, for the last decade, we can see that how the computing power and flow of information and data is coming up. And we still see a challenge where every 30 seconds we are wasting almost 1,200 tons of food and 71 people are dying from hunger. And while we are talking about all that connectivity, digitization, availability of the information, how you see the social sector evolving in that particular regime, which is creating a visibility, but we haven't seen much happening in terms of the action side of it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And my universe is somewhat different from many of the colleagues here. One, I am based in Karachi versus Islamabad, so that's one big thing. But as Acumen, we work with entrepreneurs who are trying to solve some of the hardest problems being faced by the world today. So as an organization, we have investments in 390-something companies across the world, and a bunch of them are in Pakistan. And here, as we look across the spectrum, and I'll tell you why I end up being more optimistic about this than not, what we're finding out more and more is when you look at the biggest problems being faced by the world, the solutions to these often are coming from, we call it the edges, from young entrepreneurs who are really just nose to the grindstone, trying to figure out how to solve the problems that face the world. And to give you an example, I mean, everyone living here knows that we have a crisis in education in Pakistan. It's not just the 21 million children out of school, but even the 40 million who are in school are getting an education that is not necessarily the right sort of education for when we talk about the future. Are we actually preparing students for the future? So we've tried to figure this out. The public sector has tried to figure this out. A lot of money has been thrown into it. But we have entrepreneurs now who are using the power of technology to come up with really innovative solutions. And I'll give you one example that's close to my heart, and I just heard from him a little earlier, so it's rather fresh. So this is Islamabad-based, so it might actually be very much home-based for the rest of the panel. There's this young man called Harun Yasin, and a while back, again, like many young people, just looking across the rest of his city and seeing that really there was no education options available for so many people who lived in lives of what we call just, missing dignity and just not having very much. And so he started off like most young people saying, I'm going to go to a slum and set up a school. And he did that. He went to a slum slightly outside Islamabad, set up a school, got 30 students in, used to sleep there, eat there, teach there, and realized that, okay, well, maybe he could start doing something with these 30 students, but what about the thousands, the tens of thousands that existed in that very same neighborhood as well, whom he couldn't get to? So then he switched and he said, all right, I need to figure out how to do this through digital means, and what do I have? He figured out, he got an app, went to get these tablets and worked with a bunch of partners to produce this really interesting tablet that cost about $100, and he said, I can put curriculum on this, and I can make it accessible to students across the board. And here again, he found out that it's not just having the tablet. $100 again was still very expensive for most people. How do you deal with the fact that most of Pakistan then doesn't have access to broadband or digital? And so he said, all right, once again, let's go back and keep iterating, keep iterating. He reiterated to the point that now he has this wonderful app that works on smartphones. It's called Talimabad. And until COVID struck, he had about 150,000 people using this application just in order to figure out, he was working with the national curriculum as well, and he used this as a tool to provide education and enhance learning across the board for people who may not even be in school at this point, but if you are in school, he would enhance your learnings. Now, come COVID, which is a crisis of the proportions we've all seen, and schools are shut down, he sees an increase of 600% in the students using his application. He sees the government also now reaching out to partner with him, and he realizes that, in addition to smartphones and apps, the television is this wonderful medium by which you can actually end up reaching across the board. You can reach far more in rural areas with television than you can with other mediums. So he then ended up working with the national broadcast channels, PTV 1 and 2, and now he has these courses that are being seen by, at last count, 8 million who are learning from this and figuring out how to actually improve educational outcomes. And then there are various partnerships as well with schools and other partners across the board, including, by the way, he's working with Jazz to sort out the payments on this. So the exciting thing here is that with digitization, now the tools to be able to make a difference at scale, to be able to solve problems at scale, those tools are now also available to really just so many more than they were before. If we go back a few generations, the tools to actually set up industry, the capital to do so, was not available. But now we have that available to us. And so more and more we are seeing entrepreneurs like Harun, and there's so many others within our portfolio and outside as well, who are working on solutions that are solving the hardest problem for millions of people across the world, not just in Pakistan. So that, to me, is really exciting and a huge source of optimism for how we look at the world now and as it develops.
Thank you, Dr. Ayesha. I think when we are talking about, and you created a great combination and correlation, the talent and the technology together to solve some of the hardest problem. And if we bring to Pakistan, and Irfan, that's a question for you, some of the problems historically which we are seeing, and there are multiple interventions we have seen from a public sector and a private sector, but still the scale of the problem is so high. And we have seen a couple of Telenor initiatives there as well. If we talk about the healthcare, we talk about agriculture, we talk about education sector. So we would like to really understand that where we stand in terms of the progress and how it's going to definitely bring a change. So what's the vision there, what you are working, and how more people can participate it and adopt those technologies and start using it and helping us to scale it?
No, I want to take a step back and say how far we have come in that journey, and what gives us optimism is actually that when you look at Pakistan of today, at least we all could be very proud that we have come a long way in making sure that people have basic connectivity through the cell phone, right? It's also a fact that there are more people today with cell phone than perhaps access to clean drinking water or power. Rather than sort of focusing on what we don't have, key question is how we build on this. And as said by my fellow colleagues here, telecoms is a backbone of any economy. It's a sector of sectors. And you cannot have that impact unless you sort of think of this as a journey. And I tend to think about it as a journey which we started as delivering minutes, where we're focusing on voice to the megabytes in the last few years, and now it's about delivering the moments. And that moments could be people like Harun, who've been delivering education to the platform, or 8 million farmers who are using Khushhal Zimedar, which is Telenor's agri-services. So there are different. What we see in recent past, I think COVID has really, we all talk about the potential of digitization. I remember a couple of years ago when I was heading OICCI, we commissioned a study on digital Pakistan. And one of the key analysis come out endorsed by consultants as well, that we have potential of about $45 billion by bringing in digital and financial inclusion in Pakistan over the next 5 years. That's a lot of productivity enhancement if you think about it. But the key question, which we're still debating, is how. We all recognize the potential. We all recognize that the fruits and dividends which digitization can bring in, but we were really struggling. Up till now, I would say, and COVID has actually enhanced or fast-tracked some of those. If I give you an example, at the start of pandemic, there were about 190,000 transactions happening in Pakistan, which are digital transactions on the financial space. Today, we have crossed 700,000, which is, again, a few-fold increase in just 6-8 months. Similarly, between Aamir's Jazz and our Easy Paisa service, we are, or our customers, or we're providing opportunity to our customers to convert 100 billion rupees of physical cash to electronic cash every month. 100 billion every month, just 2 platforms. And that's obviously, when you think of the overall size of our retail space, this is still scratching the surface, but it's a great progress which we have made in last couple of years, literally. Think of the opportunity which we can do by moving towards a cashless society, because those moments, people, whether it's listening to music or getting access as a farmer to the market prices, are not complete unless we also bring in the financial inclusion, the payment part of it as well. So through those services, and our independent research also suggests that just giving access to farmers of market price, weather information, which was not very reliable before, it has enhanced their income levels by 15%. Imagine those 8 million families with 15% more income to be spent on the welfare of their kids, whether it's education or health. That's the true social impact. So the social impact, we need to really look at it in a sustainable way, and that's why we are too keen about bringing those changes into education, health, commerce, agriculture. We also see a great, I would say, traction in an emergence of new startup ecosystem this year during pandemic. Also see a great examples of people doing interventions and raising money in M-Health, in education. We have other examples where people have companies working with us as startup partners have raised $400,000. EdCasa is one such example, who are bringing in a lot of local content, metric, FSC, relevant content to kids online. So there's a huge opportunity space in the digital. The key for us is to have a belief, have a common vision, and then, as Aamir also suggests, have a policy intervention. Because even if you're a small business, you need to have a strategy, which you say, you break that big elephant, that high-level view which Shahid has mentioned, into milestones, which could be quarterly and yearly. But what we are lacking, I feel, is that common vision as a country. What is the vision of digital Pakistan? What is the roadmap? How we need to get there? How we measure success? Are we moving in the right direction, right pace? What are the irritants? How we resolve those irritants? And it's not, no single company can do it. It's not telcos, it's not public sector, it's not startups, it's not academia or a social enterprise. We all have to work together to build that ecosystem, and that's where we are failing.
Yeah, thank you, Irfan. Thank you, Irfan. Aamir, do you want to add something on that, on some of the services, something which Jazz is doing as well? One thing which I always find interesting, it's not the availability of the product, it's the advocacy which has to happen at a grassroots level. Like the people, our students, they should be aware of, and we should be passing on that message to really, thank you, to really create that adoption. So anything where you feel that as a group, as a society, as a message where people who are listening online as well can take that message and go and advocate that adoption, which can really help us scale. We don't want to wait for COVID for every adoption. We want to do it because there is opportunity, and people should be doing that, and we should have a mechanism to advocate it at the same time.
So I think if the products are simple enough and relevant enough, you don't need advocacy. I don't think anybody advocated Facebook to be used by the 35 million people who use it today in Pakistan, or WhatsApp, right? They were intuitively simple and they filled in a gap. Products like Easy Paisa or Jazz Cash, they're filling a gap. people find it difficult to pay utility bills, or at least they did 10 years ago, and now there's a solution. They find it difficult to transport money from one city to the other, and a solution came along. The entrepreneurial landscape that is evolving today, payment still is an issue. If we come up with a payment platform, people will start using it. So I would say that, like if your product actually requires a lot of convincing and advocacy, maybe you need to work on the product a little bit more. So I take a slightly different view. However, there's a room and need for advocacy, and that is where Irfan also mentioned, that is highlighting the importance of this sector as a foundation layer. That advocacy with the right stakeholders and the right appropriate governmental interventions in terms of policy is certainly something that we can do a better job at.
I think great perspective. So it's a simplicity of the product. Coming to Barkan side, towards you, we are looking at the opportunities, and you are basically right now heading Pasha, and you are basically guiding even the government in terms of the IT policy and the digital policy as well. So where you see opportunity in terms of that digitized new norm, how you see Pakistan claim their fair share or a higher share from a global GDP, where we see that outsourcing coming up, building a better brand, access to market, productivity gain in general, whether we talk about agriculture or... So I'll come back with the same question to everybody as well. We try to evaluate where we see those opportunities, but starting with Barkan, that where you see that opportunity and how we can capture that.
So thank you very much. That's a big question, but I will try to answer it. One thing that Shahid Saab has mentioned is that COVID has basically, I think what I would say is that COVID has steroized the digitization in this country. I think one of the biggest problem in digitization here is the mindset. If you deal with bureaucracy, you know that a lot of us are still living in that industrial age. And when the COVID happened, I think whatever was digitized, whatever was available, the availability of internet, the 4G, I cannot even think that if 4G was not there, the IT industry would have even survived the pandemic. As soon as pandemic happened, we were forced to stay at home, and the digitization of the government services, for example, we could pay token taxes online, we could order vegetables from apps, and all of that allowed us to get the government services and those services at home, the healthcare services at home, which helped us actually survive this pandemic. And that actually, I think, has given a mindset change in the government that now is the time to go digital. And now they are much more serious. I mean, even if you go at banks, who would have thought that the bank leaderships will be doing Zoom sessions, and my daughter in second class will be as good as using Zoom as I am, right? So who could have thought that? So that has brought a mindset change. And what has happened in the industry, if you look at, how it is contributing to exports, everywhere in the world, everybody has realized that if they don't digitize, they won't be able to survive. And if this pandemic continues maybe for another year or 2 years, there was an opportunity for the last 3-4 months when the cases were going down, and we got a lot of requests from the companies. We got a lot of demand. And IT industry, if you look at the IT industry right now, luckily, in the new world of COVID, because the IT companies were able to instantly work from home and make their workers available with internet devices, Telenor, Chargy, and all these devices, we were able to continue that work. And that was not the same thing in India and Philippines. In India and Philippines, what they realized was that the infrastructure of internet and electricity was very good in the zones that they built. But outside those zones, in rural India and rural Philippines, it was not as good. So as soon as they shifted to the rural areas, they were not able to provide those services in work from home. But in Pakistan, we were able to continue to do that. That's why you saw that in the last 3 months or 4 months, IT industry still saw a 20% growth. We had already crossed the figures of last year in IT exports in February, before COVID. And when COVID arrived, I was like a little bit worried what is going to happen. Our businesses were impacted as well, because nobody was taking a decision. But all of a sudden, there was a huge surge in work around 3-4 months ago. And right now, the situation is that we have shortage of skills. We cannot hire people because there is so much demand in the industry for good people that the salaries have gone up. And you mentioned about how we can use this opportunity. I think we have to be ready. From an exporter point of view, from a person who's seeing and working with companies looking to digitize, I think definitely one of the things, ease of business, one of the key things, that is, I think, definitely the mindset problem is there, but through digitization, we can bring that ease of business, which can make the life easy for businesses in Pakistan. It's very difficult to do business in Pakistan, and it's very difficult to run a big business in Pakistan. Ask Aamir, ask Irfan, right? Aamir would tell you very well how difficult it is to do business in Pakistan. But the second thing that we have to see, and which is the core of digitization, is the skill gap. If we are to digitize as a nation, we need very good programmers, very good architects, and very good solutions. Like if you see in India and other countries, we don't even have basic solutions like Zoom solutions or HR management system. We do not have intellectual property in Pakistan. And when this COVID struck, we were forced to use the digital solutions from outside into Pakistan. So again, I think skills, if we want to capitalize on this, there are two areas, other than policy interventions on the ease of business side and digitization of all those elements and making the business easy and digitized for the companies. We have to focus on the skills aspect, and we have to focus on the IP creation aspect if we are to gain something from this. Otherwise, I think we will again miss that boat, because the demand is coming. If the industry is not able to fill those positions with the companies required internationally, soon they will start looking elsewhere. Thank you, Ji.
Thank you. I think a great one, the talent and the skill. So, Shahid sir, opportunities for Pakistan, what's your view?
Well, opportunities, as far as I'm concerned, I'll take it to the bare basics. So when I said CPEC, CPEC is a laid out road infrastructure. The ML1 and ML2 are already approved projects. In the power sector, they've already gone. Now the question was wheeling, which they were talking about. So if we get the power right, because we have solar, if we get the power right, that is 36% of the cost of the doing IT. We get the optical fiber, because even for the wireless, we need the bandwidth and the connectivity. All the submarine cables, 4 new submarine cables coming and landing into our 1,000 kilometers of the coastal area that we have. We get that right. So the broadband is there, the power structure is right, then comes cloud computing. And this is where I think a fundamental shift has to come from a policy directive. The policy has to be that the government has to realize that if they do not spend, government does not spend on the IT sector to bring transparency and digitization of the government, they will not be able to justify their position of being the righteous. And as the current slogan was, trying to do everything right, and we are here, the democratization is now on social media. We just had an example on Islamabad. A couple of people can come and choke the country, and then you have to go and resolve things. Now, power of social media, thanks to what are they doing? Till Jhelum, we had to shut down the system. Like, it is completely ridiculous. So when I say 70 million Pakistanis, so I'm saying 15 and below, 66 million, and I say 130 million in the 30 and below, that is your data. And with AI, that is your electricity. The two together are a sure shot winner for you if you get the power structure right, the bandwidth structure right, and you get the right regulations in place to help companies like Jazz and Telenor to be able to bring that connectivity. We're already at 8th, the smartest. Now is the question of how you bring these and the cost structure. And then digitized government. India today spends 30 billion US dollars on domestic IT development, 30 billion. And look at their return. They are exporting 193 billion, anticipated by 2030 to be at 350 billion. I think this is where COVID is bringing another factor into the digitization of this country, is that we are already experiencing that remittances will fall. So we are looking for alternates in this country, and the alternate to us is our freelancers. Freelancing will play that role. We now have to equip the younger generation through venture capital, through startups, through these mediums, and that is where, when I say with confidence, we have the resource. We just need to channelize it.
Thank you, Shahid. So I think that's a great correlation, again, talent and technology. Dr. Ayesha, comment from your side, opportunities for Pakistan.
I'll just build on what Dr. Shahid has said. Look, I think in terms of opportunity, the delta between where Pakistan is and where the rest of the world is so huge that almost anything will add to you and make you more efficient. It's like when someone asks me, what has social impact in Pakistan? Frankly, almost every sector you look in, if you create something that provides value to customers and is solving a problem, you are providing tremendous value to customers, and that's social impact in its essence. So there are opportunities everywhere. There's so much technology transfer that should be happening. My concern, and I think we'll get to that when we talk about the concerns here, is that we've been in this position for a while now, when the rest of the world is on another trajectory, and for whatever reason, our systems aren't able to internalize those technologies that exist. So I would really hope that we're able to coordinate, and it goes back to, not to throw everything back to the public sector and say, well, the government needs to do A, B, and C, but we absolutely need to have the right systems in place in order to enable the transfer of technology, and then continue building on what the future industries will look like. I mean, we've been investing in all sorts of things. I don't want to start talking about sugarcane and so on and so forth here, but what is the world going to look like in the future? Is Pakistan competitive in that space? Do we have any centers of excellence now and looking forward that will power that engine for the future? I mean, we have 200+ million people, and this is only going to increase. So how is that going to become an asset? Technology is going to be a critical lever here. We absolutely need to coordinate amongst all the actors and get this right. It's actually an urgent need. It's not just an opportunity. It's an existential need for us right now.
No, thank you, Dr. Ayesha. Aamir, opportunities for Pakistan.
Very well articulated, Ayesha, and I think you're hitting the point hard. This is not an opportunity, this is a need. So I think we have to start recognizing, and I'll sound like a broken record in terms of how we have to do a better job at advocating with the stakeholders who actually matter in making sure that we can at least get rid of the roadblocks. If you can't necessarily do anything better or more progressive or better to digitalize Pakistan, at least get rid of some of the bigger roadblocks. I think that in itself would be a huge favor. So echoing what Ayesha just said, digital is not an opportunity. It's a reality everywhere else in the world. You have 1 million micro, medium, small enterprises who could increase their output by selling online, right? There are certain building blocks in that thing that need to happen, which is broadband and internet for all. That is the kind of political slogan that I wish that our leaders would take, that we are going to provide broadband for everybody or a smartphone for everyone. That is the ambition that we as a country should have right now. That's both an opportunity and that's both a much needed requirement. So opportunity, yes, we could become Estonia, but reality and imperative is at least we should be at least as good as Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. So we're not even, at par. There was a recent survey done by Facebook and Economics Intelligence Unit on internet readiness, and we are ranking 76 out of 100 countries. Even within Asia, we probably are better than only one other country. So our current credentials are not particularly stunning. And yes, we have made a lot of progress since 1989 when you signed the document for the first thing. But the reality is we are nowhere near where we should be. And good enough is simply not good anymore, right? And unless we are willing and committed to be great, we don't deserve to be sitting over here as business leaders or as industry captains or as advocates of technology. So I have a much more pressing, shout towards what we need to do if we have to take the country forward. And I strongly, fundamentally believe that digital infrastructure and digital transformation is the path not only for telecom. We're already selling SIMs and building towers, and we will continue to do that. But that's not what the country needs anymore. What we need is robust digital infrastructure. And for that, we have to partner with the government. All of our digital assets is with 4 companies, and we need to basically work much more aggressively with the government so that the rest of the ecosystem that we're developing, whether it's in e-commerce or various other types of startups, they all rely on this internet.
Irfan, your comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just sitting here reflecting that we're still giving a lot of arguments to ourselves about why. Yeah, so I think, first of all, as my fellow panelists also said, that we need to really now focus on how. There's a reality that that's the only way we can leapfrog. We cannot transform education system in our lifetime through brick and mortar model. We have to digitize it. So I would say, to be more specific, we need to really lift it up, think it as a national emergency in terms of digitization. A national policy needs to be in place. All stakeholders needs to be invited, and then this has to be driven from the top. And this is not first time any country is doing it. We have great examples of many countries, including Malaysia, where Mahathir, when he was Prime Minister, was actually driving himself the Digital Malaysia vision. And a monthly meeting, basically, it sits under the Prime Minister's own responsibility. This has to happen here as well. Secondly, I just want to build on what was said by Dr. Shahid in terms of skill sets, and also Barkan mentioned that. It's a fact that, this population, young population, this demographic dividend, which we talk about, over 100 million people, could be a huge asset. But there's a big if. We need to really train them, because we may be the 4th largest freelancers, but look at the value addition. There's hardly any. We're still at the bottom of that, where they are just basic coders. We need to really teach them what is the latest and greatest in terms of trends, how the world is moving towards, 4th industrial revolution, AI, big data, etc., and need to really build this entire value chain, right from the schools to the higher education, to the ecosystem in terms of startups and job market, so that we can actually prepare them for the future opportunities where they could be actually leapfrog, and we can really go up in the value chain and build a knowledge economy. So there are initiatives happening. You will be glad to know that there will be an initiative which will be launched tomorrow under the patronage of World Economic Forum. This is a national incubator on the skill set development. We're calling it Parvaz. I'm heading the ICT part of it. And we are committing to ourselves as a private sector initiative for the time being. We hope that government will also join. And our commitment is to actually train 10,000 resources in the next few months in the ICT space. And we would like to see this actually gaining scale, where we can actually train millions of people, our youngsters, our youth, who could then play a bigger part and play a bigger role towards the knowledge economy.
Thank you, Irfan. And if we can have very quickly some comments around the ethical and the trust issues which we might foresee going forward in that digital connected world, and your top 3 recommendation, what should be the next step, like what we should do maybe in the next 6 months or next year, if we are talking about a broadband emergency and we are talking about it's not the opportunity, it's the matter of existence. So what are those top 3 recommendations, and few comments around the ethical and the trust related issues, and then we will come to the questions. We will take some questions from the audience as well. So very quick, starting from you, Irfan.
Yeah. No, I mean, we see that when it comes to the ethics and trust issue, globally, not just in Pakistan, we have seen a decline around the world where tech as an industry is losing trust. It could be linked to privacy, it could be linked to information security. So I think it's a very valid concern. And I think there's a huge responsibility on all of us as industry leaders, as thought leaders, to think about those issues as well. So in Pakistan, although we don't see this as a very active debate which is happening, I think we need to bring it up, and forum like today, I think, is a great example that we start discussing this. In terms of the key recommendation, like I said, we need to really focus on that big vision and how we should achieve it. So I would say create a national digital authority or something under which will be the execution arm. I think we have done enough talk. We have seen a lot of initiatives which are happening in silos. This all has to come together, has to be part of the national vision, and then has to be executed by the entire ecosystem together. But it has to start from the top.
So I think ethical issues, I think these are security issues. Cybersecurity has been highlighted. We also get bombarded by fake news. What is the responsibility of distribution platforms and technologies like us? Are we just dumb bit pipes that pass on the information, or do we need to filter it? And those are live discussions that go on in every environment on what is your responsibility as a disseminator of information, because that information rides on our platforms. Certainly, data privacy. I mean, we as a company alone, Jazz, perhaps sit on the data of 65 million customers. The number of transactions or events that we capture on a daily basis is going to give us more data than perhaps resides with Nadra. So there's a huge responsibility that I have to make sure that that data is protected, it's secure, and it is not exploited either for commercial or for any other gains. So those are some of the challenges that I think every CEO or business leader faces. That's about data privacy and cybersecurity. For us, there is also the added dimension of whether we play an active part in promoting fake news, or what can we do alternatively in terms of restricting them. And there's a live, like I said, dialogue going on with various governmental bodies on that. In terms of, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
3 top recommendations.
The top recommendations, I think, again, maybe you mentioned it, that we call a broadband emergency, or whatever you may call it. I would just like to highlight that we have made progress, but in cricketing parlance, we are scoring more runs than we did before, but we are nowhere near the required run rate, right? And finishing second, third, or whatever else is just not a recipe for success for a country as large as Pakistan, with 220 million people, with many kids who are currently out of schools, with a greater part of our population that does not have electricity, does not have clean drinking water. We have to think about telecom not just as a standalone industry, but as Irfan said, as a sector of sectors. This basically fuels everything else that we do. And it needs to get elevated at a much higher level in terms of national security and national importance. And again, I'm sure we are doing our jobs, but perhaps the penny hasn't quite dropped in terms of it being at the same level as food security or power security. We need to provide broadband security to our country and to our future.
Same thing. So I think on the dark side of digitization and information technology, a simple illustration a few days ago, so both my children are in online schooling classes. They sit in front of this computer, and ostensibly they're going through Zoom classes. And I happened to be in the room, and I saw that actually instead of being on his classes, my 7-year-old had this 4-way game going on a different screen with 4 of his classmates, all of whom were supposed to be, and they were all staring at the screen, but actually they were all playing video games on the side. And so, like anything else, digitization, information technology, there's a flood of information available. We have to figure out how we make sure that it's high quality information, so prevent fake news, and there have to be gatekeepers. I think we have had this, the whole world has seen that we've had this space of, there's so much excitement, there's so much available, but we still haven't quite figured out how do we manage this? How do we put the guidelines? What are the guardrails? I think globally that's a conversation that is going to be figured out, because we're seeing the negatives of this quite vividly. In terms of recommendations, again, I already went on for a little bit about how this is an emergency and how we absolutely need to get this right. But as we are in a digital reality right now, it's not a future. This is a redistributive process in which, in Pakistan as well, we will see a reconfiguration and redistribution of wealth, of opportunities. So more and more we will see that there'll be a whole group of newly vulnerable people whose skills can be just will become irrelevant. It's like any other revolution. So you have a whole set of newly vulnerable people, be that manual laborers, be that people in low-skilled jobs, that will be replaced by technology, AI. So thinking through how do we make sure that the gains from this also are accessible to the people who will end up losing in a significant way from this is something we do need to be mindful of. And it goes back again to things that, Irfan, you were talking about. How do we start building the skill sets within our population so that we're able to leverage this and support entrepreneurs who are now working on these large-scale problems that will then inevitably have gains that accrue to all of society, not just a few. So just getting those pieces right would be really critical in the near future.
Thank you.
Well, let me first address the ethical side. So I think it's a very, very extensive topic. We won't be able to cover it in 1 minute. But what we need to focus on is cyber sovereignty. And for cyber sovereignty, your first mandate has to be cloud computing within the nation. Unless and until we do not start hosting and keeping our own data so that we have the first right on how we look at it and how we allow people to look at it is the challenge. And this debate is already going on between China and the US and the Western world as cyber sovereignty. So those who are interested should Google cyber sovereignty. Coming to specific what we need to do, I'm a very firm believer, and I've said this in my own way, that do we want Pakistan to develop CPEC as the GT road? Because the GT road was a very ill-planned urban infrastructure developing alongside the road. You try and take the GT road and you take the motorways, you'll see the difference. So if we are to digitize, and the Prime Minister claims that we want to make low-cost housing, we need to start developing the infrastructure with the proper broadband, with the proper electricity. 4.3 million should be the annual target of such things as new cluster cities coming up, which are specific to technologies that are going to be the technologies of the future. The Chinese did it with clusters. So you can go to a cluster in China, and they make mobile phones, But here is the next challenge. The next challenge is that in China, factory manufacturing iPhones fired 60,000 people simply because the robot with AI was able to do the job at $5 a day. So at $25,000, the benchmark through technology has already come. We need to employ 21 million people because of our youth bulge, and another 26 million when they sort of get educated and are back in the system. So bringing out jobs of that level, knowing the upper limit is 25, if we do not play this card, and this is where the Chinese are really struggling. The Chinese, a good engineer in China is 15,000 RMB, 20 rupees to an RMB. In Pakistan, you can still get it for 1,500. If we lose that edge, because living and other things are out of sync, and we take that ratio up, we will lose this game also. We will just be dependent on what we sort of receive.
Thank you, Shahid. Barkan.
I think first on the ethics, definitely as a nation, data privacy or wo sab cheezein, I think those things are essential. We don't have a data protection act. We can't take projects from Europe because there is a requirement that once the project is here, there has to be the country where the data resides, that needs to have certain laws. If they're not in place, we cannot get the data. And definitely, from a resources point of view, even in the work from home culture, we found out that there were a lot of ethical and moral issues from the employee side that were happening where they were started doing double jobs. And that was not happening in Pakistan, that was happening in the US, where someone was working for Facebook as well as Google at the same time. So those kind of issues are there, and definitely as a nation we need to come together to, at least from the industry point of view, we need to educate people in our industry. From the, I think, action item point of view, because I focus on the skill part and I see that as one of the biggest problems right now, and Irfan mentioned it too, and Shahid Sahab mentioned it too, that we have worked on skills, but we have not worked on our basics, like for example, the primary and basic education school system, have not worked intensively on the STEM, introducing STEM in the schools. And then we have not, because HEC and how it works, we somehow, that problem is unsolvable. We somehow don't have good quality graduates coming from our universities because there are PhDs teaching, and because we don't have industrial PhDs in our universities, we have people who have almost no industrial experience teaching the students, and the students who are coming out, they are not as equipped. The interventions that we have done, they are all on the low end side. We are teaching WordPress, SEO, graphic designing, where there are hundreds and thousands of people competing for $5, $2 jobs. And we are not working on cloud computing, Amazon architects, Azure architects, all those high-end areas, we are nowhere to be found. So, and it's not that the government is not working on it. Just like Irfan mentioned, there is a 1 billion project by just one government organization to train people on the latest technologies. But what is happening there is, I mean, if I tell you about it, you will be surprised how they are teaching, right? Industry professors taking online course and teaching the students. University professors taking the online course and teaching the students. So there is a need, I think, for a national, that would be my only point, that there's a need for national skill strategy. And somehow, I think, because their education is a subject which is among the provinces and the federal, there needs to be a national skill strategy of how we are going to train our youth on the next generation, and what areas do we need to focus on. Because you talk about these 1 million digital skills, and then you train people, and then they flood the market with graphic designer and WordPress and SEO, and all of a sudden, these companies start banning people because the quality of work is so low that they just start rejecting Pakistanis. So we need to train our people in skills, the right skills, and that the data has shown, and I think from our industry experience, what we have seen, that even FSC students who have good basic skills, they can be trained in 6 months and be useful for the industry. But definitely we still need to work on our basics, our basic education system. And I think if we are able to do that, I think if we are able to train not 1 million, just 200,000 good resources, we can add $4 to $5 billion to our GDP. That's my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Barkan. I think that's quite optimistic if we can do that one. 200,000 and 4 billion. So it's a great number to, I think, the number is worth to really pursue that one. So just coming back to the audience in terms of question, any question from audience side? And if you can just raise your hand and somebody will bring a mic. And please let us know your name, organization, and whom you want that question to. Any question from audience? Too tired? Long day? Okay.
Hello. You discussed about skill gap which is existing currently in Pakistan, and I agree that the skill gap is not currently in Pakistan, but it is a worldwide problem. So my question is that what are the industry leaders currently doing to bridge this skill gap? Are they collaborating with institutions which are responsible for systematic development for those skills? Are they proposing any change in curriculum of university students? So are industry leaders thinking in that direction to bridge those skill gaps?
Who you want to? You want to take?
I can start, and please feel. Yeah, so I think, yes, there are some initiatives. I can tell you from Telenor perspective, at the moment as we speak, our focus has been on specific skill sets and specific segment. So I can give you a couple of examples. One is we are training, we feel that for people to become good entrepreneurs, they need to really think about service design and all that. So we are training about 1,000 students as we speak on service design aspects. Similarly, just last month, we've did a partnership with the government of KP, where we are training actually 5,000 female entrepreneurs on basic, these are like cottage industry, on basic skill sets in that space. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, also we're coming up with a platform which is supported by World Economic Forum, where there are 6 different segments where we have actually decided to improve the skill sets. I'm responsible for ICT, but then there's tourism, financial services, textile, manufacturing, which are all very relevant, headed by industry thought leaders. And you will hear more details in a day or so on that initiative as well. Yeah.
Anybody wants to add further?
No, very similar. We have a national research and development fund, which is called Ignite, and they have one of their main pillars, which is digital skills. The skills are slightly more basic at that level, but what we're trying to do is cover close to about 500,000 to 1 million people within Pakistan, where their basic skills on digital literacy can be enhanced. So while we were talking more specifically about some of the more fancy skills in terms of AI, programming, et cetera, remember, to take the country forward, we want everybody to become digitally literate also. And when we talked about bringing small, medium enterprises to be able to run their shops on e-commerce, they also need a little bit of hand-holding. So those people, entrepreneurs, businesses, youth, they need their skills to be upskilled. So there's a program that is being run, and I happen to be on that board, and there's a commitment to provide digital skills to about 1 million people in Pakistan every year.
Yeah, and just to close on this, we have this site, we call it Acumen Academy. So there are tens of thousands of online courses available there, and we've so far had about 1 million sign-ups for these courses. The vast majority, interestingly, has come from Pakistan out of this. So a lot of these courses are available online. We're also partnering with various universities like Habib University and LUMS to get them onto physical campuses. So it's all happening as well. There is a fair amount of content available, but we're also getting it on site in the process right now.
So from the industry side, one thing we realized working with the universities, and I happened to be on the committee which was designing the curriculum for AI and data sciences. What we realized was the problem was not the curriculum. We had one of the best curriculum. The problem was that we do not have good teachers, I mean enough teachers to teach in the university. So for example, the same curriculum would do wonders in LUMS and FAST and produce a great student, but would not produce the same level of student maybe somewhere in Sargodha or Gujranwala, right? Because you don't have those level of people who are teaching there. So that is one problem that you do not have. And one problem on that is, at least one thing is that you don't have, because your PhD model is not industrial, it's very theoretical. So the people who are teaching in the universities, they do not have any industrial experience. And because you do not have any industrial research, whatever work is happening, it's not helping the students. So, and the second solution is that you bring people from the industry into the academia. And for example, if my architect, who is taking maybe 4 lakh rupees from me, is going into a company and teaching 200 students, the level of quality he will produce would be way better than anybody else, because he will be creating an industry-ready students. So, but there is no incentive for my architect to go in the university, because he would probably not get a professor title, because it needs a PhD, because so it has to be PhD to get to a professor level or that level of salary in the university. So yes, one way is companies start helping and going into the academia. But one thing that you have to realize about Pakistan industry is that there are only 110 companies that would do more than $1 million. Most of us are SMEs in the global scale of things. We do not have those level of resources that we can dedicate our people and go into the universities and teach the people. So this has to come, this has to be driven from the government side, and they need to incentivize. And I think one of the key thing is to have projects in the academia which are in collaboration with the PhD professors and the industry people, so that those same professors and those people, when they teach and involve the students in those projects, so the students are much more industry ready, and also we have R&D based projects coming out of a university. If we need to work on our skills, and this is the same model that is being done in China, their professors have companies which they involve students in, and they have hundreds of students working on their projects. And that's how whenever the student graduates, they are taken up by the likes of Huawei, ZTE right away, because they are industry ready.
System should be established and the system should be working. Thank you, Barkan. And we have got a one question here. And I think that's the last question, and then we summarize it.
Families like Indian and Pakistani, they go to meet their relatives in India, or Indians come to Pakistan. Now there are issues with taking money, and getting it converted, and you may be run out of money also. So is there a possibility that maybe in the future the Easy Paisa, Mobi Cash, all these can be structured in a way that, for example, if I'm going, my family can deposit X number of rupees here, I get it in India, or the Indian relative, coming to Pakistan can get it here. When we are trading with, for example, India, we have to use a third country bank because there are no bank branches in Pakistan or in India. So we have to go through third country. How about this situation? Can that be done through, whatever way?
Can we use the example of some other country? You have relatives somewhere else?
Oh, you can even call it Dubai.
India is going to be a little bit tougher.
No, this has been a problem because, Aamir bhai, I proposed this in India, we had a Indo-Pakistan financial conference, and they appreciated it, but I'm naive, I'm not conversant with the dynamics,
I think it's going to be challenging with some of the countries. And I think Telenor and Easy Paisa have a similar kind of a setup. Our parent companies own a bank that allows us to do banking transactions, and then we partner through a telecom thing, and the banking license does not, the one that we have right now is a microfinance banking license that does not allow us to deal with foreign currency. Unless we upgrade to become a complete commercial bank, we can look at the pros and cons of that. But I think in the near future, that is not really one of the products, or that's not a big enough pain point that we're trying to address. So I would probably say that it's not on the radar screen for us. Using airtime as a proxy has been used in many other environments around the world. It is used easily within Pakistan, but again, it is not as easily translatable as pure cash. So products like Jazz Cash and Easy Paisa, they do allow you to transmit and transfer funds very easily within the context of the environment. And I think with growing concern around AML and FATF limitations, I think cross-border transactions will perhaps require such a high level of vigilance that will make the product a little bit more complicated and expensive to deliver. So I think in the short-term future, I don't see that as something that I'm working on.
Basically, it's regulations limitation at the moment. It's not an issue with only India. There's a lot of demand, and Barkan can confirm that from our software export industry as well on international payments. And I know that State Bank is working on it, on the regulations and all that. Unless they come up with those, we don't see any immediate solutions available.
But it is probable, right?
Yeah, it is. Technically, it's no issue. It's no issue. Yeah. And we have done some, just to add, again, a pilot which is based on blockchain, which is another advanced technology between Malaysia and Pakistan, where money can be sent without any extra charges, 24/7. So technically, all those are possible. It's more of regulatory issues, as Aamir also mentioned, anti-money laundering and controls which needs to be in place.
As a banker, I'd echo that. And until we're off the FATF, I wouldn't hold my breath on this one.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are the first person to use the word FATF the whole day.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I really appreciate the perspective and audience for their patience contribution. I hope you enjoyed that. Just to summarize in a Very quickly that since the morning we have used the word the inclusive development, so I think that's digitization is one of a way to do that if we bring the ethical dimensions and the trust dimensions and the regulation there. So I think that's a one way to really build the more inclusive society and go for inclusive development. Shafqat Saab also talked about the equitable society where the justice system has to work, and we talked about that, the education system, the curriculum, and the different curriculums and how it can work. Definitely one thing which digital really bring is a very, very empowered society in terms of access to data and information. And that's where the ethics comes into play, that how we can rely on that and how we can take forward. But the one thing which is, I think all panelists really come up with that, it's not the opportunity we are talking about, it's the emergency we are talking about. So it's either we talk about it's a need for our existence, it's the COVID really created a more awareness around it, but that adoption was pending, that's going to happen, and we have to make sure the things are simple enough, understandable, like Aamir picked up, the products and services using that digital revolution we can bring to the society which people can adopt, use, and make a better inclusive society. And again, like in the beginning I said, everybody has to play the role, because when the historian from 50 years to 100 years from now, when they will be writing the story, there will be the names and there will be the people who have contributed, and there are people who haven't contributed and stay silent. So I think this is the time to think ahead and act now. Thank you guys. Thank you very much.
If the panel would just stay where you are for photographs. Thank you very much for an awesome panel. But I think sometimes it's forgotten how good the moderators are and they don't get the credit. So a round of applause for moderators, please. We've come to the end of the day. There's going to be, I'm going to introduce Azhar in a moment just to do some pictures and formalities. Personally, I thought it's been an amazing day. We've gone from AI to 5G to blockchain to the future of food to just about everything. And a really engaged audience, fantastic audience. Thanks for staying to the end.